It's the last day of the state fair already. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, President Obama orders new airstrikes in Iraq. A hurricane hits Hawaii. Yet another document dumped from the first John Doe investigation into Scott Walker's staff when he was Milwaukee County executive. Candidates in next Tuesday's primary election scramble for last-minute votes. 2 patients with the deadly Ebola virus are brought to the United States for treatment. And Democratic candidate for governor Mary Burke is asked by a national political reporter to name something she disagrees with President Obama on. And she responds with a 10-second long pause, which is called dead air. But we start with a heated race for Milwaukee County Sheriff. Big money and a hot new issue. This is an extraordinary political story. Liberal groups, including groups advocating for more gun control, are reportedly spending more than $500,000 in the last few days of the campaign to defeat incumbent Milwaukee Sheriff David Clarke Jr. Much of the money is believed to come from County Executive Chris Abele, who is a millionaire who doesn't much like the outspoken black sheriff. But last week, a new issue roiled the campaign. The activist group Voces de la Frontera, which backs Clarke's challenger Chris Mays and is paying 5 staffers to turn out the vote for him, announced on its website that, quote, Lieutenant Mays has vowed to join hundreds of other cities across the country if elected and refused to cooperate with federal immigration officials on ICE holds that jail undocumented people senselessly and arbitrarily. Sheriff David Clarke fired back, saying that would turn Milwaukee County into a de facto sanctuary county. Under current policy, ICE officials are given access to the county jail booking records and can put a legal detainer or hold on inmates who they believe might be illegal immigrants who face deportation. Mays claimed that Clarke was misstating his position, but as of this taping, Mays has refused to answer my questions as what his policy would actually be. The two face off in Tuesday's Democrat primary. Joining me in our panel this morning, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Michael Holt, former State Representative Michelle Litchens, political strategist Linda Bruin, and media trackers Brian Sickma. I want to start with you, Michael Holt. So you have former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg's group coming in with a last-minute $150,000 media buy targeting David Clarke. This race has now become national, hasn't it?
Yes, you know, and all of this, I mean, we're talking about sheriff. We're not talking about President of the United States. How is this man so much of a threat to the status quo statewide that you have county exec throwing in $500,000 and money coming from New York? It's really kind of mystifying to me. You know, I know that they consider him to be uppity and he speaks his mind, and then, you know, some media and some black leaders will suggest that, you know, he's not status quo, and if he has any kind of conservative politics, which remarkably sound like black ministers, then all of a sudden he's conservative. You know, it really doesn't make that much sense to me.
Well, you know, though, that on Wednesday, win or lose, it is going to be a national story. Now, the pro-gun control, the anti-gun movement has not had a lot of successes lately. The Bloomberg group has been very, very frustrated. If they can get David Clarke's head on a stick, you know that it's going to be this huge headline. You know, Milwaukee voters oust pro-Second Amendment sheriff, and so that's going to be a big story, one way or another, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, what do we talk about? Self-defense. You know, he's been an outspoken advocate for self-defense. That makes him a threat.
Okay, now, Brian Sickman, I want to get to this immigration issue because, you know, there's been a lot of controversy about conservatives who are in favor of things like nullification. If Chris Mays really did make this promise to Voces de la Frontera, isn't he really promising to nullify federal immigration law, and how will that play?
Well, I think you're exactly right, Charlie. I mean, by Chris Mays going out there saying he's not going to cooperate with the federal law enforcement agency, he's basically declaring himself, if he was to become sheriff, to want to nullify federal law, which I think is a bizarre and wacko position, and I'm waiting for the Journal-Sentinel to write about it. But I think at this point in time, immigration is important because people realize that this is a problem that's going to be solved in Washington, D.C., but we need county level and local level law enforcement officers who are going to enforce the law, and Sheriff Clarke is the guy that's going to do that.
Yeah, okay. I think we have to take one step back here. Mays has not said what you just said he said. Christy Newman-Ortiz, the executive director of Vocus de la Frontera, has already backed off, saying that that statement went too far. And what I understand that Mays has said so far is that if someone is being charged with a crime, because people come into the jail and some of them are not charged and are eventually released, that basically those folks he would not report to the feds, but those who are charged with a crime he would. And this long-standing policy only became a policy under Sheriff Clark. Before that, it was more
I'm not buying this. I think that Sheriff Clark, that Chris Mays is doing a tap dance on all of this because he's obviously made some promise to this illegal activist organization, Voces de la Frontera. And by the way, why he would choose to get into bed with an organization that has vilified, attacked, tried to destroy a local business like Palermo's in itself is an interesting question. But the reality is he's never actually said what his policy would be. You're actually now quoting Voces de la Frontera. This guy wants to be the sheriff, and we have to listen to this activist organization telling us what he would do. If he is elected on Tuesday, if he wins this primary, I don't think the voters will have any idea which laws he's going to enforce and which law he's not going to enforce when it comes to the cooperation with immigration. Your thoughts on this?
You know, what I think is the Democrats are scared. They are scared nationally right now because Sheriff Clark is a strong African-American in a strong position, and he is not following the Democrat, song and dance. He's not doing what they want him to do. They cannot control him.
But he's got an uphill fight. Milwaukee County has become increasingly liberal. He's in a Democratic primary.
But
how does he survive in this?
Actually, well, not only I think we're going to have some Republicans supporting him in the primary, but I do believe voters in Milwaukee County want someone who's going to stand strong for
him. They're just saying, a lot of Democrats are saying, look, this gentleman is not a Democrat. If you're a Republican, be a Republican and run on the Republican ballot.
You can't have... I consider myself to be a moderate. You can't have moderate or even conservative. If I believe
I'm a moderate
black nuclear
Democrat,
families, what does that make me?
I get it. The bottom line is, I'm saying that a lot of Democrats think he's a Republican. That's what they're upset about.
Is he going to survive?
I believe he will, and I think even though some black leadership are tapping to a different drum, I think the overwhelming majority of black folks are going to vote for him.
I think that there's almost, I hope you're right, but I think that the stars are aligned. You have the news media, particularly the Journal-Sentinel, who is obviously totally in the tank for destroying Sheriff Clark. You have the Mayor Tom Baird, you have the Democratic establishment, you have these outside groups, you have the liberal county executive, who by the way has dumped this money in. Where have been the stories about that? So the planets are aligned. But it is going to be interesting to see how big that crossover vote is. So what has your glass half full? What has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt.
Well, my glass is half full because according to a new study, black life expectancy in the United States increased by a few months. But my glass is half empty because the wide gap between black and white Wisconsinites remained the same. I wonder why.
Michelle Litchins.
My glass is half full because the Super Bowl committee is looking at Weird Al Yankovic to be their halftime entertainment, and he is hysterical. But my glass is half empty because the Super Bowl committee is looking at Weird Al Yankovic to be their halftime entertainment.
Okay, Linda Bruin.
Well, my glass is half full because the reigning NBA champions, the San Antonio Spurs, have hired Becky Harmon as the NBA's first full-time female assistant coach. But my glass is half empty because top women athletes like Miss Harmon, who is a 6-time WNBA All-Star, are rarely even considered for coaching positions because of their gender.
Brian Sigma.
Well, my glass is half full because the U.S. has worked to strengthen its ties with African nations, but my glass is half empty because last week President Obama invited a number of the worst African human rights abusers and tyrants to join him for the dinner party at the White House. Diplomacy involves strange bedfellows, but you don't have to validate them with a state dinner.
Well, this is sort of a half full, half empty. Now, they told me that if I voted for Mitt Romney, we would end up sending bombers back to Iraq from the aircraft carrier named George H.W. Bush. And they were right. Next on Sunday Insight, Tuesday's primary amounts to an election in several races. We'll explain why. Voter turnout is expected to be very low on Tuesday, but that doesn't mean that some big decisions won't be made. In some races, the primary election is tantamount to victory in the general election. In the Racine-Kenosha area, former Republican State Senator Van Wangard is running to get his old seat back, but faces a challenger from businessman Jonathan Stites. 4 Republicans are vying for the congressional seat being vacated by retiring Congressman Tom Petri. 3 Democrats are vying for the nomination for State Attorney General. Waukesha voters will pick a new sheriff. Former political powerhouse Gary George is challenging Democrat Congresswoman Gwen Moore. And there are a host of assembly races around the area. So let's do this. I want you to pick a race, any race, and make a prediction. Brian Sickma, you go first.
Well, I'm going to predict that Sheriff David Clark is still a sheriff after November. Now, whether or not he survives the Democratic primary, I don't know, but I think we'll see him either win the primary or mount a independent candidacy after the election.
That will not happen. He either wins the primary or he's done. Okay, so.
I'm optimistic.
Michael Holt.
Well, a key race to me is the 10th Assembly District, which is being vacated by Sunday Pash, who was controversial representing an entirely black district anyway. Everybody putting their money on David Bowen. I think the winner is going to be Bria Grant, who's a politically independent Democrat.
Okay, Michelle Litchens.
The Senate seat being vacated by Senator Schultz on the western side of the state, 17th. I will be very interested to see what happens. Whitwer announced last October he is a state bureaucrat for his entire career, but the Democrat establishment didn't care for him too much, so they found their own candidate to run, and I think Whitwer's going to win.
Linda Braun.
I'm going to go for the 4th Congressional District between Gwen Moore and Gary George. Not only is she going to beat him, she's going to trounce him. For a woman to go from an abusive childhood and being on welfare to be a U.S. congressman tells me that she's both smart enough and gutsy enough to not let an individual who's been convicted of a crime and not living in the district beat her.
Okay, you guys have really gone out on the limb with all of these. Wow, Gwen Moore is going to be reelected. So who's going to win the Democratic nomination for Attorney General? I mean, that one's right up in there, you know.
Oh, I think that's.
You got Susan Happ, you got Jonathan Richards, you got Ozan.
Well, not Ozan. I think it's probably not Ozan. Probably Richards, maybe Happ.
Okay, well, you said
I'm convinced it's Susan Happ.
Why are you convinced it's Susan Happ?
I think that I should say it should be if Democrats were thinking right now, because she is actually a very formidable candidate. You look at her background; she has some weak points in her record, but she's a tough prosecutor, and I think that's what you're going to need to go up against a guy like Brad Schimmel.
Okay, so who's going to win down in the 21st Senate District? You have Van Wangard running against Jonathan Stites.
I think it could be pretty tight. I have no idea. I think Glenn Grothman may win the congressional district up in the 6th, though.
What do you think? Congressional district in the 6th?
I actually think Grothman has the speed going into the election day.
I think that's going to surprise a lot of people.
Anybody but him.
Okay, let me just tell you something, though. I think this is going to surprise. This is going to surprise a lot of people in the media elite and the political establishment. If the election were held today, I think Glenn Grothman would win that primary. That doesn't mean that he's going to win on Tuesday, but you saw last Thursday night in Beaver Dam, both the candidates were attacking him. That was an indication that Glenn Grothman, I think, has a little bit of momentum, and I think that Van Wangard's going to win his Senate seat back down in Racine. Now, you may not want to hear it, but we're going to tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, mine is to the Republican Party. It says a lot when J.C. Watts proclaims that Senator Ryan Paul is the only Republican to aggressively seek support from black voters.
Michelle Litchens.
To Joe Biden, when discussing the illegal children coming to our country, you said, "These kids are our kids." Well, maybe you should ask Americans first before you assume we want to take care of more children than our own.
Linda Braun.
Well, last week, Joan Rivers said civilians who'd been killed in the Gaza Strip had low IQs, and she wasn't sorry they died. While Penelope Cruz and her husband, Xavier Bardin, said Israel was committing genocide. My advice is to celebrities. If you're racist, ignorant, or an unfeeling jerk, please stay out of international politics.
That's pretty much all of them. Okay, Brian Sickman.
Well, my unsolicited advice is for Wisconsin Chief Justice Shirley Abrahamson, who about a week and a half ago called Wisconsin's voter ID law a Jim Crow law. Well, studies have shown that minority voter turnout is unaffected by voter ID laws, and Shirley, you only sound ridiculous.
Well, my unsolicited advice is to the great liberal white hope, Chris Mays. If you're running for a job in law enforcement, Chris, it's probably not a good idea to promise radical activist groups that you won't be enforcing some laws. That might come back to bite you. Next on Sunday Insight, Brett Favre is back. Did you miss him? Well, is it finally time? The Green Bay Packers announced last week that Brett Favre would be welcomed back into the fold next year. The Packer legend will be inducted into the Packer Hall of Fame, and his number 4 will be retired, joining a very, very select group of Packer greats. So is it finally time to get over it? The on and off again retirements, the whole Viking thing, or is it still too soon, Michelle?
You know, when you first heard this, didn't you take this sigh going, oh, and then you're like, you know what, it's about time. And what I've been told by my teenage son is that you have to watch Favre's acceptance speech. It will move you, and it reminds you about how much he loved playing football for the Packers, and yeah, they should retire
except
his
when he was playing for the Vikings.
Exactly. He was a dumb, stupid mistake.
The Vikings, okay.
I think it was very smart for them to announce it now. It's almost a whole year away, and I think that was deliberately done to give Packers fans time to adjust, get over their initial, but he went to the Vikings and get back to remembering all the good things that he did when he was here.
I think you're exactly right. I did think that was very clever that they had a long lead time so they would be able to determine what fan sentiment would be, number one, and number two, give us a little bit more time to work through those complicated feelings. Brian said.
I think this is absolutely the right move. I mean, the Green Bay Packers didn't pay Brett Favre to be a nice guy. Now, everybody here in Wisconsin, we all wanted him to be that nice guy, but he was an outstanding athlete. He deserves this kind of an accolade. And I think, when you look back at his career, he's one of those guys, you may not want to have him hang out at your house if you're in Wisconsin, but he did a lot for the Packers team. He did a lot for the state whenever he's playing for the Packers.
Okay, everybody else is so far is very forgiving. What about you, Michael Holt?
Oh, yeah, and I said previously, there's fault on both sides. We really, depending on which history you want to visit. But, protocol dictates that you be inducted into your team's Hall of Fame before you're inducted into the league Hall of Fame. And he's a year away from that. So it has to be now. And if folks have some problem with it, get over it.
I didn't know that I was going to react this way, but I guess I did have that reaction that, I've not been anxious to bring him back, but when I heard, I thought, you know what, okay, it's time. We waited. There's a certain fullness of time to be able to get over it. And the reality is we've had a lot of players, great players, Vince Lombardi, who did not finish as a Green Bay Packer. I mean, in San Francisco, did they have a big issue with Joe Montana, or have they gotten over it? I think it's time to do it. But does it mean that in the state of Wisconsin, we can't ever talk about texting pictures of your junk ever? I mean, it's just like that will never, I'm sorry, no, we will never, ever mention that. So what is it you don't get? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt, you're first.
What I don't get is how members of a local Negroocracy can claim sheriff candidate Chris Mays deserves our vote for sheriff when he has conveniently dissed the black media, refused to answer questions about his position on racial profiling, illegal strip searches, and the deaths of black men while in police custody.
Michelle Litchens.
Well, Charlie, what I don't get is why Marina Dmitrievic can devise referendum questions, albeit ridiculous questions, to motivate Democrat voter turnout in Milwaukee in November, and no one in the mainstream media is talking about it.
Linda Bruin.
Well, what I don't get is how a woman without a ticket could sneak past security and get onto a Southwest Airlines plane, even though authorities knew about her history and had her name and photo. Makes one wonder how secure our airports really are.
Brian Sickman.
Well, what I don't get is why the federal government mandates that Wisconsin transportation officials spend money on things like bike paths and beautification projects when there are approximately 81 structurally deficient national highway system bridges in Wisconsin.
Well, what I don't get is, where are all the good government folks, the editorial writers, wringing their hands about outside dark money in politics? Oh, wait. It's all aimed at destroying David Clark. Never mind. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week, but first, here's your morning news update. Panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Michael Holt, you're first.
What makes this great American experiment in democracy successful is citizen participation in the electoral process. Obviously, everyone wins, the overwhelming majority votes. Conversely, we're all losers when we allow our political preferences to be canceled out by the vote of a small minority. In other words, vote Tuesday.
Michelle Litchens.
Michael might be in shock, but my winner is Barack Obama. He's doing the right thing by saying America is going to help those led to their death by the ISIS in Iraq. America is the world's policeman, and when we leave that position open, the bad guys step in. So stand strong, Mr. President. My loser, though, is Michelle Obama. Depriving our children of bake sales will not end childhood obesity, but it will end many extracurricular activities which are funded by the sales. If you want to really make a difference, ban chips and soda from food stamp purchases.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my winner is Ronald Reagan's former press secretary, James Brady, who was paralyzed in the Reagan assassination attempt and died last Monday. Brady was an effective campaigner for gun safety education, background checks, and reasonable gun control measures. The situation situation in northern Iraq is my loser. 40,000 Yazidi are trapped without supplies, and they, plus 100,000 Christians, are under threat of death from ISIS, who require their prisoners to convert to Islam or die. ISIS is more extreme than al-Qaeda and a direct threat to the United States.
Brian Sikla.
Well, my losers of the week are the folks at Game Changer Salon, a secretive national network of left-wing journalists, leaders, and organizers that media trackers discovered through an open records request. And this past week, we made their entire secret membership list public. My winner this week is Michigan Congressman Justin Amash, a Republican. Amash faced a tough primary challenge last Tuesday, and some doubted that his brand of libertarian conservatism would be approved by voters. He won his primary soundly.
Did you notice that Linda Bruin sounded like a neoconservative? My loser, the Obama administration has broken a lot of promises, but it's kept one of them. In Wisconsin, a new report says that a new EPA rule on ozone would turn most of the state into an economic no-go zone and kill 52,000 jobs here. Not a single state Democrat has objected. We are the losers. Winners, Packer fans, they're back, and we're ready to put the whole Brett Favre thing behind us. What is not to like? Thanks for joining us. Join me for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Remember to vote on Tuesday.